Shadur Sanders just did something publicly that he almost never does. He called someone out by name. And I want to be clear about why that matters, because when a player with his specific track record of measured professional public behavior breaks from that pattern and decides something is worth addressing directly, it means the thing being addressed genuinely crossed a line. This isn't drama for drama's sake. This is a calculated, deliberate response to a specific situation that had been building for long enough that staying quiet became the wrong choice. I want to walk you through exactly what happened, who Jordan Seaton is, what he said, what the facts actually show, and what this entire episode reveals about the larger dynamics swirling around the Colorado program right now. To understand why Shedur's response landed with the weight it did, you have to first understand the pattern it was responding to. This wasn't one player making one critical comment on his way out the door. It has been a recurring behavior across multiple transfer departures from Colorado over the last season and into the offseason. Players leave through the portal, land at programs like Clemson and Tennessee, and then use their introductory media appearances as platforms to draw unflattering comparisons back to the program they just departed. Facilities, strength and conditioning, coaching quality, the development infrastructure. These are the categories the criticism has concentrated in, and it has been delivered with enough consistency across different players that it started generating a media narrative with real traction. For a significant stretch of time, the Colorado program absorbed that narrative without offering a direct public rebuttal. That restraint ended when Jordan Seaton's comments reached a level of specificity that demanded a factual response. Seaton is an offensive lineman who was part of Coach Prime's program before committing to Clemson through the transfer portal. Following his departure, he sat in front of cameras and implied, with the kind of careful wording that leaves plausible deniability while still delivering the message, that Colorado's development infrastructure wasn't at the level a serious NFL prospect needed, that the strength program wasn't adequate, that his physical development had been underserved during his time with the Buffaloes. The implication was that Clemson represented a meaningful upgrade in terms of what the program could offer him as a developing athlete, and the contrast being drawn was not subtle. Here is where I need you to stop and actually sit with a specific fact, because it is the fact that makes Seaton's claims so difficult to defend once you examine them honestly. Jordan Seaton arrived at the University of Colorado weighing approximately 330 pounds. During his time in Colorado's program, under Colorado's strength and conditioning staff, using Colorado's facilities and resources, his body was transformed. He left as a 305-pound lineman, leaner, more powerful, carrying the kind of physical profile that NFL scouts and offensive line coaches look for in the next level of development. That is not a cosmetic change. That is a fundamental physical transformation that represents months of serious, professional-grade work. And the evidence of it is not anecdotal. It is documented in photos and video that are publicly available and completely verifiable by anyone who wants to look. When a player's own body represents the evidence against his claims, the argument becomes very difficult to sustain. You cannot credit a new program for building on a foundation that your previous program constructed. You cannot stand in front of cameras and suggest that a program's development infrastructure was inadequate when the physical proof of that program's work is visible every time you step on a scale. The contradiction isn't subtle or open to interpretation. It is direct and factual, and it's the kind of contradiction that requires a factual response rather than a diplomatic one. Shadur Sanders has spent his college career building a public reputation that is nearly the opposite of what critics predicted when the attention on the Colorado program first intensified. He doesn't engage in social media arguments. He doesn't take shots at other programs. When controversy has circulated around him, and there has been a steady supply of it, his consistent response has been to say nothing and let his preparation and performance do the speaking. That track record is precisely what made his decision to address Seaton directly so significant. When someone known for that kind of restraint chooses to break from it, The thing that broke it registers differently than it would coming from a player known for public confrontation. And crucially, the way Shedeur handled it reflected the same discipline that has defined his public presence throughout his career. This was not an emotional reaction. It was not personal. He did not attack Seaton's character or go after him in ways that would have been easy to dismiss as drama. He pointed to the documented physical transformation. He referenced what the Colorado staff had invested in Seaton's development. He made the argument that the narrative Seaton was pushing in front of cameras did not align with the reality that Seaton's own body documented. And at the core of the response was a point about something more fundamental than statistics or physical measurements. A point about honesty, about acknowledgement, and about what you owe to the people who invested real time and real resources in making you better. Shedeur's argument was essentially this: whatever your reasons for leaving, erasing what was done for you is not an honest way to go. And a lot of people in the college football world recognized the truth of that argument immediately. At the same time Shedeur was making that public statement, Coach Prime was delivering a message to his current roster that deserves equal examination because it reveals something important about how he runs his program. He told his players directly, "Do not talk about your former schools, your former coaches, or your former programs." He framed it through an analogy that cuts right to the psychological reality of why those kinds of comparisons are counterproductive. Talking about where you used to be when you are in a new place is like talking about your ex when you are in a better relationship. It signals that you haven't fully arrived where you're supposed to be, that your energy is still partially invested in what's behind you rather than what's in front of you, that you are not yet fully present in the competitive environment you've chosen. That is not just a message about optics or managing the program's public image. It is a statement about the mental architecture of real competitors. The understanding that the people who actually win things are relentlessly forward-facing and have no interest in settling public scores with old situations. The timing of these two messages, Shedeur's external response to Seaton and Coach Prime's internal message to the current roster, created something more significant than either message would have been in isolation. Together, they articulated a clear and coherent statement about what the Colorado program stands for and how it conducts itself when it's under pressure. Current players watching this unfold in real time were seeing demonstrated, not just described, the difference between the right way to handle a difficult situation and the wrong way. The contrast was visible, and the lesson was embedded in the event itself rather than in a lecture about it. Now I want to address the transfer situation more broadly, because I think part of what's being lost in the way this is being covered is an honest engagement with why many of these transfers are actually happening. The NIL era has fundamentally restructured the decision-making calculus for college athletes. Programs like Clemson and Tennessee have deeper NIL collective resources. They have longer established NFL pipelines that increase a recruit's projected professional market value. They offer financial packages that in some cases represent genuine life-changing sums for young men who grew up without the security those numbers represent. Making the financial decision to transfer when that kind of offer is on the table is completely rational. Nobody watching, honestly, should expect every talented player to prioritize program loyalty over significantly better financial terms. The rules of college football have changed, and players are navigating those changes in ways that make sense for their individual situations. But here is the distinction that keeps getting collapsed in the coverage. Choosing to transfer for financial reasons is honest and defensible. Choosing to transfer and then publicly misrepresenting the reasons by constructing a misleading narrative about the program you're leaving, that is a different thing. If Jordan Seaton transferred to Clemson primarily because of a better NIL arrangement, that is a completely understandable decision that most people would respect. What is not understandable or defensible is using his introductory platform at Clemson to suggest that Colorado's development infrastructure was the real issue, when his own physical transformation during his time in Boulder directly contradicts that framing. The transfer is not the problem. The dishonesty that followed it is the problem. And Shadur Sanders putting that distinction on the record publicly was not petty, it was necessary. Something else worth understanding about the timing of all this criticism is that the coaching concerns some of these players raised in public were about a staff that Coach Prime had already diagnosed as needing significant changes and had begun replacing before those criticisms went public. After a difficult 2024 season, the Colorado program went through a complete coaching overhaul. New coordinators were installed on both sides of the ball. Coaches with NFL-level experience and credentials were brought in to elevate the professional quality of the staff. The program did not wait for external pressure to identify and address its shortcomings. It moved proactively and with meaningful urgency. The irony embedded in the timeline is significant. The players who cited coaching quality as a central concern in their departures were describing a problem that the head coach they were criticizing had already identified and was actively fixing. That is not the behavior of a program that doesn't have self-awareness. That is what leadership actually looks like when the results in a given season don't meet expectations. And through all of it, through the departures, the public criticism, the media narrative building around the program's stability, the questions about what Colorado looks like without Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter as its two most recognizable faces, the recruiting didn't collapse. Top-tier players continued to commit to the Buffaloes. That is not a minor detail. Programs that are genuinely in crisis do not maintain recruiting momentum through sustained adversity. The fact that elite prospects continue to choose Colorado under these circumstances tells you something real about the program's actual standing in the college football landscape, separate from the narrative being generated by departing players in front of cameras at their new schools. I want to bring this back to Shadur Sanders specifically, because his response to Seaton was not just a moment in the Colorado story, it was a moment in his own developing story as a leader and as a person who is making choices about what he stands for in public. He has spent his college career under a level of scrutiny that most players at any level never experience. The son of one of the most recognizable figures in football history, playing at a program that became a national media event, producing at a high level while being evaluated through every possible lens for evidence that the success wasn't earned. Through all of it, he maintained a consistency of public character that has become part of how the people who watch him closely think about who he actually is. His response to Seaton fit that character because it was grounded in fact, delivered without excess emotion, and motivated by something more than personal interest. It was a defense of the program and the people who had invested in developing players like Seaton, which is a fundamentally different kind of motivation than self-promotion. When Shadur eventually makes the transition to the professional level, and his performance record and profile make that a question of when rather than whether, he will arrive with something that most players at his position don't carry into the league: a fully established public character record. NFL front offices evaluate behavioral patterns and public conduct alongside athletic ability, particularly for quarterbacks who are going to be asked to lead locker rooms through difficult moments. The way a player exits adversity, whether he maintains honesty and professionalism when there is no strategic incentive to do so, whether he demonstrates loyalty to the people who invested in him. These are the things that get noted in rooms where roster decisions are made. Shadur's response to Seaton was a character data point that added to an already strong record in that category. Seaton's public misrepresentation of the program that built his physical foundation was also a character data point, and it cut in a different direction. The broader story here, the one underneath the specific back and forth about facilities and physical transformation and transfer portal decisions, is a story about what happens when accountability meets the new economics of college football. Coach Prime has always built his programs around standards that go beyond athletic performance: academic accountability, personal discipline, the expectation that the habits and character traits built during the college years are the actual foundation on which professional careers and adult lives get constructed. Those standards are genuinely demanding. They are more demanding than what some players arriving in the NIL era are prepared for, because the NIL era has created environments where financial leverage can substitute for personal accountability in ways that previous generations of college athletes simply didn't have available to them. The collision between those two realities, a program built on genuine standards and a player culture that sometimes expects those standards to be negotiable, produces exactly the kind of transfer departures and critical exit commentary that Colorado has been navigating. What Shedeur did by calling out Jordan Seaton was something most players in his position would have declined to do. It was easier, and in many ways strategically smarter, to let the noise continue without engaging it. But he made the judgment that some dishonesty is specific enough and consequential enough that silence becomes a form of consent. He chose to speak. He chose to do it with facts rather than emotion. And he sent a signal to everyone watching: recruits, current players, the broader college football world, and the professional evaluators who will eventually be making decisions about his future, about what kind of leader he is and what kind of environment Colorado is operating from. The Colorado program has real challenges ahead. The roster is rebuilt, the season is unplayed, and the results will ultimately determine how this chapter is written. But the character with which the program's most important figures are conducting themselves during the difficult period before those results exist, that's worth paying close attention to. Because character, more than any depth chart or spring practice evaluation, is what tells you what something is made of when the real pressure arrives.